It's okay.
Warming up. Test, audio test. There, it's running okay.
Yeah, I switched the mics around this time.
If you are watching this episode in the future, that means you are watching the pre recorded live stream. The show is officially starting in a few minutes. Feel free to watch us babble or jump ahead to the start of the show. Let's manually share our links now. Ooh,
So exciting day.
yeah, in a good way.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Uh,
I don't see it yet.
yeah, let me queue up.
Here, okay, I can see the stream now in Facebook. Resharing the link. Maybe. Resharing the link to the mailing list. Resharing the link to some groups.
So does have YouTube yet open as I post the tweeters? Okay. Oops.
I'm type of city.
Legit challenge.
Okay, I dropped stuff.
We'll start very soon.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a wee bit.
Facebook links have been reshared. I actually don't see the YouTube. Oh, there it is. YouTube is running and now sending it to Twitter as well. Okay. Posted. And we should be ready to start in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. Hope you all had a good day. Although, like, work was long though. Like, I was still finishing up stuff. I have campaigns launching because it's a 10-10 weekend, so that always keeps everyone busy in the marketing world. Because we like our repeating number sale days.
Mm-mm.
To some degree, our main companions in this pandemic sales, online sales.
And then some of you might be wondering, why are we wearing these shirts?
Of course, we're wearing pink. It's a good day to wear pink.
We're wearing pink because of the color, because of the meaning behind it. And they're also awesome shirts with artwork, featuring artwork by Carlo Vergara for his comic line Judges Eternal.
Yes.
But otherwise, it's because it's pink. Pink has brought hope to the Philippines, and we don't mean the singer.
Although she is much beloved
Yes.
in her own way.
So I guess we might as well get started because we still have work to do and it's a Thursday.
Okay, I
We'll be right
will.
back after this opening spiel.
Yep, give us a moment.
Oh yeah! Baduy Pride!
This is Toby.
And this is Rocky.
And if it's your first time here, welcome to Baduy Pride, a little space on the internet where we talk about anything we want.
It is completely unscripted and not entirely accurate, but at least it's honest. Join us as we talk about everything and anything random live.
And if it's not your first time here, thank you so much for joining us again. This Thursday, we usually talk about geeky stuff on Thursday.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be a nice chance to slip in some tabletop RPG topics again. We haven't really done this in a while.
That is true, because we haven't run out of board games to talk about on Mondays.
Yeah. So since it's October and Thursdays tend to be about fandom stuff and geek stuff, I thought it would be great to have an episode all about horror tabletop RPGs.
Ooh, horror. Rawr,
Why is that your horror?
rawr.
And when it comes to horror RPGs, we'll try to cover everything from the idea about how to enjoy a horror game, why play a horror game, samples of some horror games that we recommend,
Mhm.
and I guess we could include to close horror games which we don't know if they'll ever be created.
Okay,
Like
I'm
whether
not sure I
they're-
know what they are, but I guess we'll find out.
So let's start with horror.
Define.
Horror games are games that either touch on horror aspects or elements, such as vampires and other monsters,
Okay.
or touch on horrific concepts.
Okay.
And this is where other types of horror games come in. But generally, what makes the distinction is not always clear cut.
Mm-hmm.
For some games, the horror is the experience that the player goes through, the feeling of helplessness, the feeling of um, um, hopelessness, the
Okay.
inability to change where they are. For others, the horror aspect is less in the loss of agency, but more in the subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
You will have fantasy games wherein the heroes traverse through hell, and you see all these horrific visuals
Like a literal hell.
and terrible monsters, but they're not necessarily like afraid or running away. The players might be, because the players are like, "Oh my god, it's a ganyan," and they're screaming and all that. But the characters would be, we're the warriors. We'll fight. We'll use our magic.
Mhm.
And then last would be horror in the sense of it's really trying to celebrate the genre. So
Okay.
the game itself explores or focuses on certain tropes. And there are tabletop RPGs that try to hit one, two, or three of those things. Some try to focus on some. Others try to be very generalist, wherein you can play it this way, but you can also play it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then others are very specialized,
Okay.
and that the systems are fine tuned to really make that horror aspect be present.
Okay. So given all that, then what are the sort of games that we're going to focus on more? Because like by the item that some may consider games with horror elements
Mhm.
as horror games, but then you argue things like if I like a skeleton or a demon in D&D
Mm.
is just another antagonist.
Yeah, it's just another monster.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily, even though these are elements that have been used in horrific stories,
Mhm.
but just because there is
Skeleton.
some sort of a vampire in D&D, it doesn't mean it's a horror story.
And that's the first thing that every gamer has to consider when they want to play something horror. Horror will always be subjective.
Mm-hmm.
And to use the movies as an example, some people will watch Jaws and be terrified of going into the water. Other people who might have worked with sharks or know about oceanography would watch the movie and laugh because
Okay.
it's hilarious. The sharks don't do that. Similarly, you'll have people who will watch a show that explores a more realistic horror, a mother losing their daughter in a
Mm-hmm.
crowd, and you'll have other audiences who'll be bored because they were expecting monsters, they were expecting ghosts and lots of blood, and it's what she just lost her daughter and that's it. Why is this a horror movie? So horror is always subjective, and that's the first thing you have to consider when you try to play any role-playing game. The moment someone says this will be a horror game, check if it's the type of horror that you are interested in playing. Check if it's the type of horror you'll find fun to play.
Which is like in general anyway, when you talk about any RPG,
Mm-hmm.
that because everybody's understanding of things may be different. And
Yes.
this is why we often talk about the value of what is referred to as like a session zero,
Mm-mm.
where it's expectation setting, it's
Yes.
alignment, it's setting boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So even through things like that, like when we say that we're going to play a horror game, what makes it a horror game? Why is it a horror game
Mm-hmm.
in this group? What are we hoping to achieve? Do we want to celebrate like a particular storyline? Like it's a horror game in the style of Cabin in the Woods,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. That it's a Cabin in the Woods style story. Then people kind of have an agreement and
Yes.
understanding of
Hey,
what it means.
Mitch.
Hello, Mitch.
Even when you do use pegs, you still have to make sure that you're all on the same page.
Yes.
Some person might say, "Oh, I like this. This is a horror game, so it's going to be zombies." But then,
That's wide.
if someone was expecting The Walking Dead, and instead you run a game that's more like the Resident Evil movies,
Oh,
then
that's very
it
different.
will be very different, even if they both have zombies.
Yes.
Likewise, you might have someone who'd be, excited at the thought of playing a vampire game. Only it turns out they were expecting Twilight when you were planning to do Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Mm.
So you have to make sure that you're clear as to what expectations are. In session zero parlance, this includes what we call the lines and veils. The lines and veils is one of the safety tools wherein you define as a group what are the lines, things you'll not have in the game, and what are the veils, things which you can have it but don't focus too much on it.
Yeah.
um, you should never feel embarrassed or pressured or obligated to agree with someone when it comes to the lines and veils.
Mm-hmm.
The better, safer way to do it is the moment something is brought up as either a line or a veil.
Just accept.
Yeah, and um,
You don't even have to ask why.
don't even test it. Like,
Yeah.
parang if the person doesn't want medical violence, don't go. Okay lang ba if it's just the scalpel? Don't negotiate.
No. Yeah.
Just throw away with medicine and stuff because that's where it's related, and focus more on something else. Only I think the only time when defining things becomes necessary if it's vague enough to the point that it might be affecting the genre itself.
That's true.
So-
like if you're doing a vampire story and then someone says no blood,
Yeah.
like, ooh, that's a little hard.
Or to the very least, maybe let's understand what's an acceptable veil. Like maybe we can still have blood, but let's not show bloody violence.
Yeah,
And the
let's or
person
let's
like-
not indulge and
Yeah.
relish on
Mhm.
the feeding and what.
Yeah, maybe they just don't want. Maybe they are expecting you to do something very vicious and visceral, like the Hostel movies. But the other person just wanted to like have a droplet falling, or maybe that's still too much for the person, and that then becomes clear for everyone. Okay, then maybe we shouldn't play vampire. Diba? I mean,
There is that.
That's an
There
honest
is that.
statement. So the lines and veils are important. The session zero expectations are important. Would you like to talk about the X card next as the safety tool when it comes to horror?
Oh, okay. Well, X card is like it's easier it's the less prep safety tool
Mhm.
in the sense that if you can't think of lines or veils to suggest, you always have this backup where if anything comes up in the game that you're not comfortable with, that
Mhm.
you do not wish to explore further,
Mhm.
the description is going a weird way, you can always literally tap the X card. Although in our online games, it means someone types X, 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 X,
Mhm.
X many times. And then, regardless of what's going on, regardless if you're in the middle of a scene,
Yes.
middle of a piece of dialogue, you fade to black and you move on.
Yes.
And you don't ask why, you don't dwell on it, you just move on.
Mhm.
And at most, you check if you need a timeout.
Yes.
And like, do you need time to breathe
And that's
recover
actually the
yourself.
other safety tool that nicely works together with it. Check-ins.
Yes,
The X card is your panic button because you never know what you are not okay with
that
sometimes.
is true.
I now share this anecdote often wherein we were once hanging out at the bar we love, O Bar, and I was outside with some friends while you were inside with our other friends.
Mm-mm.
And one of the friends I was outside with um, excitedly was sharing because we haven't hung out in so long the medical procedure she recently had.
Yeah.
And
To be
me,
fair, close friends.
yeah, and me, despite being someone who loves horror and all this and that, when I was hearing it, I realized I started to feel lightheaded, which was new, which was
Hmm.
very strange for me. So I started to mutter, time out, change topic, but I don't think they heard me. So they continued talking about it, and the next thing I know, I was grabbing my friend, I was Flip, and I was telling him, I'm falling, I'm fainting, I'm fainting. I come to a few minutes later, um, Flip and my friend Jovan were telling me, Toby, are you okay? Are you okay? And it turns out I fainted.
Mm-mm.
And it was freaky for me because I never had that type of an experience before. From that point on, I've now realized that maybe with everything that I've gone through in life, hospital related stuff does hit me now in a way I didn't expect. And sometimes that's how trauma works.
Yep. It's not something that you only get one set in your
Mhm.
life at the
It's
very
not
beginning.
conscious.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily make logical sense in the sense of, it wasn't me hearing that and I was suddenly remembering this and that. It literally was a me hearing that, my body reacting, and me, my brain confused. Na parang, why am I, why? And then I fainted na pala.
Yeah.
So, um, that's why stuff like the X card and check-ins are very important.
And these are not exclusive to horror tabletop
Yes.
RPGs. They're usable across games that you
Mhm.
play, because again, you never know when you may stumble across something that will make people feel
Mhm.
uncomfortable or the like.
It could
So
be an action sequence wherein you're having such an awesome fight scene, and then just as you described this thing, it turns out to trigger someone who had a pet who died a certain way,
mhm.
or who had a relative who got into a similar accident, and that touches on X card areas without you realizing it. So never feel that X cards are only for players you don't know or don't trust. They are a good universal safety tool no matter how close you are to each other.
Hmm. Hmm. So but they become especially important when dealing with horror tabletop
Mm-hmm.
RPGs, because the nature of horror is like it'll often explore very
Uncomfortable things.
uncomfortable
Yeah.
areas of life and things, and are very traumatic, very intense.
Mm-hmm.
And with tabletop RPGs as such a involved, invested narrative experience, then
Mm-hmm.
um, it can feel very weird. You don't need moving pictures for it, for things to feel, all that culp, that real, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for a better word, but um, and that's why you have to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so um, so for you then, what are I guess going back to that, what are the types of like horror RPGs that we want to like focus, or at least I don't know. I guess we can talk about what celebrates the genre
Yeah, we can. I
more.
think we can go through it in that way, and
Okay.
in terms of what people might be looking for.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's start with, um, you're not a horror fan, but you like the concept of monsters. You like the concept of exciting things. While Dungeons and Dragons is, as they call it, the world's most popular role-playing game system, um, are there more? Are there other game systems you have in mind that do touch on horror elements without necessarily being a horror game?
I mean, because even to which is some aspects of the World of Darkness games,
Hmm.
I feel fall into this niche.
Yes.
I mean, vampire, straight up, as much as vampire is like by definition, ooh, it's about being a scary
Monsters.
vampire. It's about being a monster.
Hmm.
It's about a horrific, bloodthirsty thing. But because of the way that the lore has evolved over the years, if you're playing a vampire game, it often is a very political.
Yes.
It's a political game filled with very complex societal rules and
Mhm.
structures and all that.
The horror tends to be in the choices you might be making
Yes.
or the realities you might be dealing with, since you are a monster that does have to take the lives of others to survive. And for those who might be naysayers and go, but you don't have to kill them, realize that you have now found it acceptable to use another person as a juice box.
Yeah.
And that in itself is horrific.
Yep. Yep. So there are a lot of things to
Mhm.
consider, and but so a lot of the World of Darkness
Mm.
games kind of turn things around because typically it's always like the heroes versus the monsters. But
Yes.
then a lot of the World of Darkness games said, "What if you're the monster?
Yes.
What if you're that?" Hence, there is vampire, werewolf,
Mhm.
uh, the demon stuff, which is not
Yes.
literally being a demon, but often a demon summoner, controller, the like, or depending on
Yeah,
the line.
because the Demon the Fallen line does have you play the fallen angels, so
Okay,
you are the demons.
okay,
In the others, you might be people who summon demons, or people who relate to demons, or people who are possessed by demons. Um, your mileage may vary. You have games like Changeling, which many claim are not horror because they're not monsters. But then, if you really study the concepts behind
it can
them,
be horrific.
because in Changeling the Dreaming, you are things of dream and creativity in a world that's slowly killing them by simply existing. And Changeling the
Changing
Lost,
the loss is dark
you
because yeah,
yeah.
you've been stolen away by the fairy world, and
Hmm.
then you finally escape. But then you escape to the real world to find that you have been replaced by
Hmm.
a fetch or a changeling construct made to look exactly like you. So in the years potentially that you've been gone, nobody noticed
Yeah.
because someone's been living your life. And so, how do you deal with that? And in addition, you are no longer quite human anymore.
Hmm.
Depending on the role you served in Fairy, you've been forever changed. So, like maybe you were someone's pet, then you come back with feline features, and
Hmm.
you are slightly cat-like. So, it's creepy.
You have games like Wraith the Oblivion and Orpheus, which
Ah.
then explore the concepts of afterlife and life beyond death.
Mm-hmm.
For Wraith, you literally are a ghost. Unfinished business has kept you around. For Orpheus, on the other hand,
You're weird paranormal investigators with ghost powers,
mhm,
depending on if you need to be put into a a flatliners style
mhm,
medically induced coma so that
yes.
your spirit form
Hey,
comes
Dennis.
forth, or you can do this at will. And
Skimmers.
both versions of going into your ghost form have their pros and cons,
Mhm,
like um the sleepers take longer, but then are kind of more secure because
mhm.
they don't get damaged as much. And then whereas the skimmers, they can tap into their powers very quickly, but then ooh,
It hurts to stay
it
out.
hurts. It literally hurts to stay in that
Mhm.
form. So interesting stuff.
If you're not really into systems like the World of Darkness, and you prefer
World of
systems
Darkness.
that are
Quack.
kinder to zero prep, you then have games that are powered by the apocalypse.
Powered
Um,
by the Apocalypse is everyone's friend. I mean, like every because it was a system designed for convention play,
mhm,
which means playing with strangers in a room where you have only a limited amount of time before you get kicked out and the next set of people have to come in. So it was made to be super fast, and then it has the fundamentals of the system are easy to understand, and then have been adapted to so many genres that generally, if you've played one Powered by the Apocalypse game, you can theoretically play them all with at least 10 minutes of reading.
yes.
So it's not bad.
Among key things to share or to recommend when it comes to Powered by the Apocalypse games,
For horror,
we'll have to start with Monster Hearts for those who like horror without necessarily being too scary.
we always say CW horror.
Yes.
It's horrific but pretty.
In Monster Hearts, you play a certain monster type, and you are all angsty, emotional,
Teen stuff. Could be teens, but
sexually,
yeah.
emotionally aggressive, or impulsive. That's a better word.
Impulsive.
Characters in a world where you have to deal with something. So someone might be the chosen one, Another one might be a vampire. Another one might be a ghost or a werewolf.
Chosen One is literally like a Buffy type, like
Mhm.
is designed to, and then but there's also
The human,
the human who is like
The
super innocent,
the one who always gets into trouble.
and gets into trouble and has no special abilities, but is essential to moving story forward. So
But then beyond stuff like Monster Heart, still under the Apocalypse World system, you might want to push for something darker and more engaging. And that's when we'd recommend stuff like Bluebeard's Bride.
should we have brought the book out?
Yeah,
I took a picture
I
of
feel
it
bad.
earlier. It's
but
over there.
It's
Oh, it's
yes.
sticking out just over there.
Such a beautiful book.
Yeah, it's definitely a very pretty cover, hard to photograph.
Would you like to talk about the book?
Bluebeard's Bride is tricky because you're all technically playing one person. You're
Mhm.
playing aspects of a person. This being the bride of Bluebeard. And then there are archetypes instead of like character classes
Yes.
that you fulfill. And based on that, it's like each of you get to explore a room in Bluebeard's house while he's
Yes.
away, and then you'll experience things. And then in the end, they resolve. I don't know. It's like I don't want to spoil things, but
Basically, since each player portrays an aspect of the bride's personality,
Yes.
one might be the witch, the other one might be the virgin, the other one might be, I forgot the maiden. But the basic idea is, when someone's in control, they tend to make the decisions. But then at any point in time when something is spooks them out or is too much, the passes control and the other personality takes over. Interestingly, in the game, everyone takes part in building the horror.
yes,
So it's a very different approach to horror that people might not be used to. And for those used to more traditional, the GM explains everything and the players react.
this is not one of those
It
games.
won't be an easy transition, but if you find that sweet spot, it is amazing.
Yeah, because the book basically provides you description. I mean, as the GM, descriptions of the rooms and like what people may find there,
Mhm.
but it's actually all a very, very thoughtful psychological exploration of the psyche of well, the bride in this case, and it's like spoiler alert: Bluebird's a bad pirate, so she's not a happy bride. So, it's an exploration of that, and then sort of the role of women and stuff. So it's actually a very powerful piece, and then I think it's something we'll always recommend, not just because the book is beautiful, which it is. I mean, you saw, but it's also just a very clever story.
Okay. Beyond that, we can mention Dread. Dread is one of the most innovative horror games systems that we've seen in a long time. And I use the term system because it's not a role-playing game that comes with a setting.
Yeah, with a very heavy story.
It allows you to come up with your setting because it focused on the mechanic, which is you play a role-playing game with a Jenga tower.
Jenga, and those unfamiliar, it's the wood, and then it's a stack of wood, and then you pull the blocks out one by one. So similarly, instead of rolling a dice to determine your outcome, you draw a tile or a number of tiles depending on things, and um, keeping the tower up means you're successful for now.
Yes.
But then eventually that tower is gonna fall. Okay, um, and I'll always put the caveat that the goal is not to play a very competitive game of Jenga. I think there are some people that get very excited about the system, and then it distracts them from the genre and kind of ruins the story.
Yes.
But because there is always the option, which is interesting in the game, that a player, instead of drawing tiles, could just push the tower down, which is essentially they choose to sacrifice themselves. They choose their way of death, and by doing so, they can still help the others or move the story forward. So, but it's like better that this person fails than the other who may have another role to play in the story that's building. So it's very interesting and very visual because there is literally a tower in the middle of the table, and as it teeters and totters, and then like, oh god, is this it? Is this it? So no matter how quote unquote good you could be at something, it looks like failure is inevitable because the tower will fall.
And that's what it captures nicely when it comes to the horror genre. that buildup of tension,
Hmm.
that knowledge that inevitably someone is going to fall, someone is going to die, and that's what that game captures really well. Moving after Dread, we can talk. Well, we'll focus on the stuff that we've tried.
Yeah.
Um, so moving after Dread, we can talk about Don't Rest Your Head.
Have you played this
You
one?
don't
I can't
remember?
remember now.
Don't Rest Your Head.
I know we have the deck building game.
That's Don't Look Back. I think.
Yeah, but same universe,
Don't
right?
close your eyes.
Don't.
So Don't Rest Your Head is a role-playing game where you play people who have peered past the illusion that surrounds the world to know
Okay.
the true horror that exists. But the only reason you're able to do that is because you have not been sleeping. And through your constant insomnia, you've now also developed special powers. Sadly, that also means the things that are out there now sense you as well and are after you.
It's always the case. When you
Mm.
look into the abyss looks into you.
In a very similar game, we have Cult, which also has that same idea of the world is covered by an illusion. You are actually prisoners of the fallen angels and the old gods, and you are struggling to find your way around it.
The
origi-
setting has been exciting, but thankfully there's a newer system.
Yes, the original system was a very crunchy traditional percentile system that had um, multiple pages of a character sheet. But the new system was powered by the apocalypse.
Thank you, Power by the Apocalypse. So I was surprised, like, oh my god, this is Cult. We're playing Cult, but it's so much easier now.
Mhm.
So what a joy that things have come forward, and that's always a good thing. Okay.
Um, with that, we cannot ignore franchises. A lot of movie franchises are the source of great horror, and few are as magnificent as the Alien movie franchise.
Wow.
There is an official Alien RPG system, which incredibly does capture the feel of the movie.
There are great nuances to that system that
Mhm.
just add to the flavor.
It uses dice as rolls to check on oxygen levels and panic levels. So it's not a matter of min-maxing technology to handle things. It's more you go out and spacewalk to check on things. Okay, that's fine. Check oxygen. And then you roll. Okay, oxygen's still fine. And so when the dice rolls go bad, you then work into the story what happened. Maybe you snagged the tube and suddenly you sprung a leak. Or maybe someone forgot to double check the tanks. Similarly, dice have always what we call panic dice. And as you do your rolls, panic dice can alter the events really well.
yes.
You might succeed, but since you succeeded with panic, you lock out someone else outside and they're now pleading for you to open the door.
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of like games based on franchises, so
Mm.
TV shows turn into games or movies turn into games, they often have to bring in some sort of a story point type system,
Mhm.
which is always the magic hand wavy, like I manipulate reality, essentially because TV characters, especially our protagonists,
Mhm.
um cheat. It's
Yes.
like they survive way more than they should. They achieve more than they probably could as normal humans. And so every game that tries to adapt it adds that ability to kind of fudge the numbers.
Mm.
Alien went the other way and systemized a way for you to be a clumsy, panicky human,
Mhm.
which is so smart. It's just so smart. And the few games we've been able to play for Alien, it's like, oh my god, it's always you all have your hidden agendas that you're
Yes,
trying
that's
to
one of the big things
accomplish,
about the game, the hidden
and then
agendas.
you have panic moments where you just ruin things and yeah, on the side, yeah, there happens to be an alien or two that's going around that we may have to deal with. So great stuff.
The game also offers two forms of play. Cinematic play basically accepts the fact that characters may die, and you have the freedom to choose who's left in the roster of NPCs to keep playing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the more campaign based play has characters like in a regular traditional game grow in experience and go through the things. So far, we've enjoyed cinematic. We haven't really
Yeah,
explored the other one.
because we like killing players off before the end of the show. It's like because
It works for
it's
Alien.
aliens. You need to have a final character, whether it's a final girl or not.
And
you know.
often players opt to kill themselves as
Yes.
appropriately dramatic moments in the story.
At least for the people that we played Alien with are typically people who love the Alien movies. And I will say Alien and not so much Aliens, but like that first movie, which really had the horror feel.
Yeah.
Then it makes for a lot of fun. Dennis mentioned the book is physically heavy, and yes,
That's true.
it's quite a thick book. That Alien book. We do
Um,
have a copy.
the same system is being used for an upcoming Blade Runner RPG, so that's exciting.
Hmm.
There's rumors of a Terminator RPG coming up soon as well. We don't know if it's the same publisher. But now that we're talking about aliens, we have to talk about the other great horror that's out there from the stars that is forever making us feel insignificant and weak, and that is Cthulhu and the Lovecraftian universe. For that one, we have multiple games. First, of course, is Call of Cthulhu. We cannot deny that that game continues to bring terror to hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of players all over the world.
It is the D&D of Lovecraftian horror.
And interestingly, it is more popular than D&D in Japan.
Well, because Japan is like totally not a creepy country.
In that game, as old as the system is of still using percentile dice, rolling below half, below one fifth, it's still a very tight system.
Mm-hmm.
It has a sanity system which you lose sanity similar to hit points when you encounter horrific things. Lose too much, and you might be forced to make intelligence checks to check if you lose control of yourself for a brief point in time.
Mm-hmm.
But for those who are not content with just facing the horrors, you can fight them, and that's where Delta Green comes in. Delta Green is the if Call of Cthulhu is Alien,
Yeah, Delta Green is aliens.
yes. Delta Green is about fighting the monsters, fighting the horror. Whether you want to do it militaristic with Delta Green or more pulp in the approach where that's where Cthulhu pulp and the like come in. There are even versions of the game now, not necessarily under the Call of Cthulhu line, wherein it's based in the Cold War, in the spy era, in different settings. There are also newer takes to the mythos concept itself, thanks to the fact that copyrights have been raised as far as that line is concerned. So you have everything from the Yellow King campaign chronicles to stuff like Brindlewood Bay,
Ah,
which has Golden Girls meets Lovecraft.
that is so weird. It's Golden Girl, little old ladies doing detective work, but they investigate a Cthulhu horror.
Mm. And even more interestingly, it's a zero prep horror game
Powered by the Apocalypse.
because the players,
Yes, the players put things together.
Mhm. As the game progresses in that one, the GM is able to give out little clues as to what horrors await, but it's the player's job to string them together. And once they have a coherent theory, they roll to see if they're right.
That's just a funny system. And like we did it like no matter how half baked your scheme, your explanation is, if the rule says it's okay, then it's okay.
But-
Then it works.
But then, if let's say you're not happy or satisfied with military meets monsters or investigators meets monsters, then you can go full sci-fi and explore the world of Cthulhu tech, where you have people with special armor and mecha and biological suits that are based from the Migo and other horrors out there. Part Guyver, part Robotech, part Evangelion.
Yes.
Cthulhu tech is all about enjoying the mix of sci-fi and horror and yet still finding joy in both.
Should you talk about the cats?
We have to talk about the cats. Call of Cthulhu in its earlier editions actually had an official expansion where you had cats as the characters you will play.
Okay.
But in the modern RPG industry, we have the cats of Katsulu, which is again a powered by the apocalypse system that allows you to play cats dealing with the Lovecraftian horrors.
And it's not like, you're not anthropomorphic cats. You're literally cats.
It's not Disney cats
Yeah,
who
yeah.
talk and
It's not Thundercats.
and um, yeah, it's actual cats living with humans, and the humans might be cultists and all that, and the cats just happen to realize that their humans might be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very, very fun horror game that forces you to think differently.
What was the one? I can't remember now because we played like only the zombie tools. But the one where you start where you are and you play
Yes.
as yourself. What was that game again?
So that is the end of the world game series.
Ah, yes.
And in the end of
Okay.
the world game series of books, you play yourself, and your group happens to be sitting at the table playing a role playing game when the end of the world happens. And from that point on, playing characters based on yourself, a thing that is not always easy to do or safe depending on the player group you're with.
Not often recommended.
You are challenged to see how you will survive the end of the world.
And yeah,
Um,
and it has different settings
Yes.
for different apocalyptic situations. Obviously, one of the first one was like a zombie one,
that's
but
what we played.
but they have an alien one. They have a Cthulhu one,
Yeah, you have
right?
the Wrath of the Gods,
Yeah.
you have the Revolt of the Machines. All of them use a very interesting system that has you try to gauge your stats, and then you ask the other people around you to choose whether or not you gauged it well or not. Um, both the stats both act as your acting ability and the hit points that you lose if you get into trouble. On a similar vein, Tales from the Loop exists,
Mm.
wherein the horror is more being in a world where there are things you do not understand. Brilliantly approached as a TV show. Tales in the Loop is the game that we recommend if you like the science horror of shows like Fringe or X Files
Or Tales from the Loop.
or Tales from the Loop.
Amazon. Okay.
And then I guess to wrap up our list, because we don't want to go beyond an hour.
Yeah.
We have to mention, I guess, the last two games that I want to, at least for me. Then we
Okay.
can add more. So the first one would be John Wick's Shower Marchen,
Oh, yeah. I knew it was gonna come up.
which is in a similar vein. You have oh my gosh, George's Children, which is naman by Jim Pinto. In both games, you play children and you are thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And yet, despite being children, you have to find a way to survive. In John Wick Shower Marchen, it's pure horror. You wake up in these ruined beds in a place that's almost reminiscent to Silent Hill.
Mm-hmm.
A um, a church bell rings in the distance, and a man with a wicked meat hook, forever grinning, starts stalking all the children there.
And you're in a town full of children.
Yes.
You're all children in your pajamas,
Not knowing how you got there.
not knowing how you got there.
The game system is brilliantly simple. You have fear and you have hope.
As your stats.
If you act in fear, you roll fear. If you act in hope, you roll hope. But then, if you succeed in acts of fear, you then do things very selfishly. So maybe you run away, but you do this by kicking the other child behind you to stay behind.
Yeah.
If you act in hope,
Trip
then
that little girl.
you're helping others and the like, but then that also means you're willing to expose yourself into danger. Brilliant system, frighteningly terrifying, and surprisingly very replayable.
Yeah, because I mean it's like that Cats of Cthulhu game where the problem is you're playing literal cats. In this
Mhm.
case, you're playing literal children. You're not MacGyver children.
Mhm.
You're not superhero children. You're just kids who went to sleep in their beds and woke up in this scary place. And you have nothing. You don't know what to use. And then there're just all these other kids and they're all just running. Some of them have been here longer and you
Yes.
don't know why, and you don't have time to talk about it because the guy with the meat hook is like walking around. And we've played a few iterations of this across different player groups, and there is still like so much to experience in the game in terms of the setting, and
Mhm.
it's kind of weird. It's like it's definitely not a campaign game, but it is a great scary night
Mhm.
experience.
And then the last one I will probably have to mention is Lacuna. Lacuna, The Birth of Mystery and the Girl from Blue City, remains one of the deepest, most introspective, symbolically twisting game that we've ever experienced.
We love this game.
It's not written as a horror game,
Hmm.
but the ramifications and the possible horrors of what's really going on are what make it brilliant. Everything from a game resolution mechanic literally tied to the heart rate of the character,
The heart rate thing is crazy.
right?
It's super awesome.
You do things, you roll. If you fail, your heart rate's rising. If you succeed, your heart rate still rose, but at least you're succeeding.
No, because even if you fail, you can push, which means you
Yes.
roll again, but you add both the failed roll and the successful roll
To
to
your
your
heart rate.
heart rate.
And it reaches a point where your heart rate's too high that you might die because of cardiac arrest. But then it doesn't stick to just that. The game is, super sciency, and the mindset of you are people entering this place called the Blue City, which may or not have been inspired by the movie The Cell or
The
movies like The
Matrix.
Matrix. And while you're there handling whatever missions you have been given, missions you might not even remember, you have to eject before your heart gives out.
And I will just cite that one of the skills that is provided in the game is writer, which is the ability to read. And that already is like an alarm bell
Mhm.
in your head. Like, wait,
What kind of world is this?
what kind of world where you can't read unless you have a skill for it? And
Mhm.
it informs the narrative so well. And it is also theoretically like very little prep in the sense that character creation is done in game or
Yes.
can be done in game.
It's part of the game process.
You don't even get to choose your name because
Mhm.
it's all rolled up,
Mhm.
and then
And not knowing anything about the game
it's
is part
literally
of
who
the
you
game.
are. Yeah, yeah, and that hence we lovingly repeat one of the lines in the book,
Mhm.
which is memory loss is common in
In
the
the
Blue
Blue
City, which is always the answer anytime you have questions. And
Mhm.
then if you have too many questions, bad stuff's probably gonna happen to you. So stop asking questions because memory loss is common in the Blue City.
So, in terms of games that we recommend, I guess we could end it with that and move now to the. So,
Play a
how
horror
do you play or
RPG.
how do you enjoy a horror game? Um, Beyond safety tools, the first and foremost thing that I think that is necessary for any horror game to work is the buy-in.
Yeah,
People must be willing to play a horror game.
and you know playing that particular flavor of horror
Yes.
that you're trying to play.
Which means, unless everyone's in the same page and everyone understands that this is the type of game it will be, if you don't finalize that first and foremost, then you will have a game where you'll have some who don't feel comfortable, or you'll have some who might approach it differently, ruining the fun for others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, for example, common sense will always state when freakish things happens,
Run
you
away.
get away, you don't get involved, you don't check what's making the noise,
Yeah,
you don't inspect on your own, you don't tell yourself you can do it and wade in the water. But that doesn't work if you want a horror game.
yeah.
If you want a horror game, you will wade in. You will open that door. You will tell your friends, I'll be right back, and go check that
Let's
noise
split
in the
up.
darkness.
All
You
these things.
you have to embrace the tropes. And if there is this common defense mechanism of people to think, you know, they're so stupid in horror films. I wouldn't do that if I were in that situation. But then if you take that mindset and play a horror game, then you will not be playing a horror game.
And you won't have that particular fun. And it's
Mhm.
like it's along the same lines also of like even for like a horror in space type alien game, and then
Mhm.
like uh you get a SOS from a nearby ship, we ignore it. Then okay,
We won't be involved.
we won't be involved, we move on. Then what's gonna happen to your
Or you
story?
see a drifting ship and then you check and connect. Okay, so it's drifting. Life scans, none. Okay, let's leave.
Yeah.
You ruin the game. See? So you have to embrace the tropes. You have to be willing to embrace and know that the characters won't necessarily do the smartest thing, but that's because the genre expects it.
Yeah. And I
It's
mean, to some degree, a lot of genre fiction tied like RPGs have the same thing. There
Mhm.
are conceits to the genre that everyone at the table needs to agree to accept.
Mhm.
And then it helps everybody tell a better story
Yeah.
together.
To be even more blunt about it, all games have this buy-in.
Yes.
It's just more evident in horror. But in a similar note, if you're playing a superhero game and then one player goes, "Oh, I don't want to be a hero. I'll just stay home." Then maybe for a story arc that works.
Yeah,
But then if the entire game that's all the players doing,
then what do we do with you?
then why is that player in a superhero game? Likewise, if you're playing a fantasy game wherein you're there to quest, to fight against evil, and then you have one player go, "Oh, can I just be a tavern keeper and stay home?" Then there's no harm in playing that, but maybe the group's game isn't working for that player. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
that player would prefer to be in a different game, or maybe the game itself might be
Not a
something.
great choice.
Yeah. So there has to be that buy-in regardless of genre.
Yeah, but then I guess it's most evident in horror games because of the sort of specialized nature
Mhm.
of what makes it a horror game.
And that is the need for suspense. When you play horror games, the mood, the build up, the timing is very important. So something as simple as um, you're moving in the dark room. Is there anything there? You're not sure. You keep moving. That's already building tension.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you were playing a normal fantasy game and not a horror one, you're moving in the room. Okay, I'll check for traps. Okay, roll. Okay, you rolled enough. Okay, you didn't find any. It's very straightforward. It's very direct information. So that amount of time needed to build things, to build the suspense, um, that's a very hard thing for a GM to create,
Mm-hmm.
more so remotely.
Oh yes.
So players who aren't in the same buy-in can very easily destroy that with a simple side comment, with a ill-timed joke. So when playing, it's good to find ways to still allow these things without affecting the main game. Like in our remote games, we have an out of character
Character chat.
chatter. People post funny gifs and all that and laugh about things, but we keep the main game quiet. We don't interrupt it with outbursts. Excuse me. And then beyond the building of suspense and the buy-in, there is the willingness to be vulnerable.
Yeah. I mean, like nobody wants to be the victim, but then the whole thing of a lot of horror is the the fact that you are not untouchable, and
Mhm.
that this is a superior, at least a scarier thing, a superior thing, or it is just unknown and coming at you from an unknown direction. Then you're unable to defend
Mhm.
yourself. Then that needs to happen.
A The vulnerability goes for both players and characters.
Hmm.
For characters, there's a tendency for some players to go full, "Oh, I know what's coming, so I'll prepare for everything." So like this game will have vampires. Oh, can I pack garlic and then I'll have a steak and then I'll also have,
Holy
and it's
water. Yeah.
parang, so are you a vampire hunter? No, but I think I read about this and that in fiction and stuff. But you're kind of like, so do you want to fight it? Is that what you want to do in the game? Likewise, you will then have players who are not choosing to be vulnerable. Um, Usually, they react with jokes.
Mm.
They try to diffuse the tension, and these
Humor
are,
is a common
yeah,
defense mechanism.
and it's not bad. But again, if it simply shows you're not comfortable with playing horror in that way, then that should be something that you better speak with your group with, because it has to work with all of you. And likewise, if it was a game that's supposed to be comedically horror, for example, there's Inspectors, which is a
Mm.
Ghostbustery game that literally has you face the other players
As
at
a
some point in
confessional.
time to do confessionals. So it's meant to be humorous. It's
That's a
like
great game.
Ghostbusters in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
deck. Then that's fine. But then if someone's trying to run the most dramatic moment in a Call of Cthulhu game, and as the great god rises from the sea, you start joking, "Oh, it's Aquaman," then you know you're you're kind of ruining the moment that the GM might have been trying to build for the last few hours, and the other players might have been enjoying being scared about.
Or at least invested in the
Yeah.
moment. So yeah, it's ultimately all tabletop RPGs are group experiences, are shared storytelling,
Mhm.
and you gotta work with each other, guys. You can't prioritize your fun over everyone else.
But on a similar note, um, the game masters must always also keep in mind that the loss of agency for the character should never be the loss of agency of the player. Um, Common tropes can range from being imprisoned, being helpless, being trapped, being unable to do certain things. Um, you have horror where the person can't swim away because there's the monster swimming around, or the character can't get out of the hole because their legs aren't working,
Mm-hmm.
or they can't find their way out of the woods because they don't remember where the car is. And those are all valid ways to have horror. But then, if it reaches the point that the player is told they can't do anything either, then it might start to feel like the player isn't playing at all.
Yeah.
And that is a thing that all people who run horror games must always pay attention to. Never let the player feel that it's not fun.
There's no options.
Mm-mm.
I mean, like, and as much as it could, playing to the genre, then well, it's really supposed to be that way. But then, as a game though, they still gotta have the option to do
Mhm.
something.
They should always still feel like there's something they can do. For example, if it were a zombie story, um, some players might think that their character at this point, okay, I think he's gonna give up because the zombies are all around the house and he has no weapons. As a GM, if your group was going for a really tragic, horrible, dark game, then that's a good way to end it.
Mm-hmm.
But if your game was meant to be something outside of a tragic doom and gloom, everyone dies sort of thing, then it's your obligation now to help the player see other options. Like
Mm-hmm.
you might mutter, it's this moment you notice there are birds, and as you look up, you realize that the next door house has a balcony that you think you can jump to. Give them concepts, give them hope, give them things they can go for. Don't you know you're not there to antagonize the player. You're not there to make the player feel hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
You're there to make the character story feel hopeless, but you're there to make sure the player still has fun.
Yeah, yeah, and it's never fun when you're playing a character and then there are just no options,
Mm-mm.
and so then it's like, so what do you want me to do? It's like then I guess I'm dead, and then the player just wants to bail out, and like
Mhm.
obviously that you've put me in this weird corner, and then I guess not that death is forbidden, but it has to have meaning, and it
Mhm.
has to, I wouldn't mind dying if it is still ultimately a consequence of my actions, because at least I tried fighting back, I tried whatever, I tried running away, and then it still didn't work. Then it's fine. Then that's that still makes for a good story. But
Mhm.
then if you feel like your player just walked into a corner and the GM never let you navigate your way out,
Mhm.
then
Or
that's not fun.
a Prince of Persia moment. You turn the corner, blade slices you in half, you're dead.
Yeah.
That's horrific, but for the player, that sucks.
There's no defense against it. It's like playing Zombicide and you can't roll defense. You just hit by zombies. It's so weird.
So, with those tips, few tips then in terms of how to make sure that the games do get more interesting. Um, Expand your vocabulary.
Mm.
Um, it gets tiring if you keep describing blood the same way,
It's always the spooky room, and the
or
spooky
or
house,
or
and the
it's like it's
spooky tree.
always so. What do I see? It's dark. You can't see anything. Okay, we move to this new location. What now? It's
It's
dark.
dark.
You
You
can't
can't see
see
anything.
anything. So you have to,
This is not a text-only RPG. Where it's like, what do I see? You see nothing. What do you see? You see nothing.
horror needs the players to visualize things because the brain is the best way to make things spooky.
Yep.
And the GM's role is to help the player think more. So, it's easy to say it's dark and the horror is in the darkness. But it's worse when it's dark, but you think you hear something moving there. Or it's dark and then you smell something breathing nearby.
Mm.
You know, Try to give those little elements that allow them to start pondering what else, what if,
Yes.
what is beyond what I can
Fill
see.
the darkness,
Mhm.
and you don't need light.
Likewise, don't turn into a novel. If you start explaining things and you realize you've been rattling off for nearly 5 minutes just to describe how horrific or scary the scene should be, it probably stopped being. You want the players to use what you have given, but then go wild with their imaginations. Less is more.
Yeah, it's like I know this is like my challenge when we first played like through the Giovanni Chronicle, the
Mhm.
Giovanni, yeah, Giovanni Chronicle for vampire, the older vampire, and because there are long swaths of like, oh,
Yes.
Toby's reading from the book, and then like it's these long descriptions of things, and
We-
they're
we
appropriate.
learn.
They're appropriate, but then like for as someone who's been raised in the modern gaming tradition only, it's like, oh, what is Toby doing? And then
This is very Final Fantasy Squaresoft. I am
yeah, it's like
watching
it's
a
this long,
cutscene.
unskippable cutscene, you know. So it took me a while to get into it, and and I just tell you now that from a practical point, if there's a way to break
Mm.
it up a bit, or to
Yes.
like, or save the some of the narration so that when players ask questions,
They trigger it.
then they trigger the
Mhm.
description. I mean, all these little tricks.
Aina nicely shares glorious deaths.
Yes.
Make them always count.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it was a pointless death as far as the narrative was concerned. Make it a spectacle. Make the player still enjoy that it happened, even if they didn't want to have it happen. Because no one really wants their character to die, right?
Yeah.
But then sometimes you realize your character needs to die or will have to
And you
die.
want to go out with a bang. Man.
Yes.
It's like this is why old adventure games like Phantasmagoria, as terrible as the scripting was, is still super memorable because oh my god, there were so many great ways to die. and and just that the final arc, the big finale confrontation in
Mhm.
Phantasmagoria, and I'm sorry I'm like slightly segueing. It is a very long final sequence where you cannot make a mistake. And every time you make a mistake, you die. And they took time to film those different deaths. And good job. That's like it because it's a celebration of the genre.
Mhm.
And it did that in a computer game. So your tabletop RPGs celebrating horror can do the same thing.
Last, and this only really applies if you're with groups that are open or have agreed to such things.
Mm-hmm.
Look at going beyond the game. Standard approaches, which used to be much rarer when I started gaming, but now are very common, at least prior to the pandemic,
Yeah.
is use music. Find music that helps tell the mood, build the story. The basic rule in music is if it's unfamiliar, it has a better chance of working.
Mm-hmm.
Because the moment you play something familiar, players will hum or players know the song.
Yeah, as ominous as Darth Vader's theme is, it's probably not going to be great because everybody knows the Imperial March.
But
and
at
all
the
these
same
things.
time, if you're crafty enough, you can use those expectations against them. I remember how there would be some songs that are used that I've used in some games to catch you guys off guard
Mm-hmm.
because you were expecting it to be for something else.
Yes.
Beyond music, some players use props, others use ambient sound effects, soundboards,
Lighting.
lighting, space. You know, like having players play with a very filled table can sometimes add to that feeling of unease. A quick trick is have people play in different seats.
Oh, that's annoying. That's annoying. Like I mean, and this is like great for campaigns where everybody sits in a certain place, and then just make everybody sit in different places.
And
Like,
because it's part of the narrative we're in, something's wrong, and
uh,
this doesn't feel right. But stuff like that are options you can do if your group is open to it. Um, Props, things you can hand off to them to inspect, to look at.
mm-hmm.
Um, I will always cherish how there was a point in time where our games used flashlights to look around the room to find
Yes.
clues. That was a lovely thing I feel that we had in one of
No,
our
I
games.
think the best word for me is like there was a
The vegetable song.
there was a game that you made me get a mask, and then inside the mask there was a message for me that not to trust other people. But I think other characters also got a message not to trust my animal mask.
Mhm.
So then it just super, it was a Lacuna game, but it just super messed things up. Then like we all had information that didn't agree.
It nicely had that um, spy feel of not knowing if you can trust each other
Yeah, yeah.
because they didn't even trust the message they received.
Yes. So things like that. So it makes for great atmosphere, great
Mm.
mood. Okay.
And when you can't do props, the last option is to subvert expectations. Samples of this, and using Lacuna as an example, was the players through the sessions of Lacuna have realized that they could check on who they're with by calling them. And calling is a way of saying the name of the person. So the person will then respond, and you know it's exactly them.
It's a telepathic call.
So I allowed this to be used. It was part of the system. It was a brilliant piece of getting around things until there was that one game session where it was going all well all the way till the end. And then the big reveal was the traitor was the person doing the call. Because when they tried to call him back,
Didn't hear it.
someone else answered.
Yeah.
And it was such a brilliant moment.
It was the mask. It was the mask game. It was me. It was me. Toby made it with someone else. It's like, oh, damn it. So,
But then it all fell into place.
It was brilliant.
And the next session, it was, what? You guys were there? It looked like me. And it was a new layer of the horror. So subvert those expectations when you can. Just try not to overdo them. You can only have too many. You wake up and it was just a dream. Things happen to the same group before
Mm.
they go, dream na naman to, no?
yeah, yeah. So be careful. And then I find, to some degree, it's like a lot of like really intense or good narrative horror. The games may not necessarily last that long
Mhm.
because good horror has an ending.
Yes.
So you may
It
not.
needs an ending.
It may not become this years long spanning
Mhm.
adventure. Maybe it's just a couple of sessions, like over the course of a
Mhm.
month or two, and that'll be enough. And that's why a lot of like horror stuff actually do great as one shots.
Yeah.
because it's that one foray into this
And then
world.
if you go for campaign-based horror games, you really need to have a clear buy-in at the start.
Mhm.
So what type of horror are we doing? And since this is going to be a campaign, are we looking at people going insane by the end of the campaign? Are we
Mhm.
looking at a more heroic ending and you stop the big evil?
Mhm.
What is the expected theme? It's not necessarily that you're promising them they'll succeed or what, but it's making sure that everyone's on the same page. Because the last thing you want is, half of the group is excitedly embracing, oh God, we're all gonna die, and that's fine, it's fun, but we're all gonna die, and then one player going, what? I wasted all this time playing this character, and then you'll just die. And that's a wait, but that's just what we agreed upon at the start.
Yeah,
So you have to make sure
the,
that's clear.
It's the conceits of our story. What are you
Mhm.
doing?
So there has to be that buy-in that's clear at the start.
Okay.
So with that, as I was saying, the last one is: are there certain horror or horrific things that you would find curious to see in a game?
I think I was thinking about this now, and then I finally have an answer. Like, and this is maybe more from a marketing side than
Mhm.
a personally want to see it side. But I think someone needs to totally like embrace American Horror Story
Mm-hmm.
and create a system or a setting that
Because it's a rich franchise.
it's a rich franchise. It's like,
Mhm.
oh my god! I realized we've only watched the first like 4 to 5 seasons. There's like another
Mhm.
5 already,
Mhm.
and each is its own genre. And so to do that, and I don't know, find a way to capture the fact that you have the same actor playing different characters
Mm-mm.
across iterations without necessarily being a shared universe. That could be fun. That could be fun. I mean, like, yes, by right, you could play it with like a Monster Heart system as a base,
Mm-mm.
but it's like
You,
I feel like there's
you
enough.
want a mechanic that connects them.
Yes, there's enough clout for this thing and love someone put the effort and like give us a system, and I'm giving you the idea. Just do it.
Mhm.
Just do it.
Aina shares, I want to see everything except lizards. Yes, we know that is your line, and we shall maintain that line no matter what.
Yep.
Which is why I think, sadly, with Aina, we will never have a Jurassic Park inspired game.
Yeah, because I mean,
Too
dinosaurs
close.
are
It's just too
dinosaurs, but they're
close.
close.
It's
Yeah.
too close. Um, Ooh. I think for me, and it's a challenge I've kind of placed in myself in the book I'm writing now,
Mm.
is I want to do a Squid Game slash Battle Royale slash
Mm.
Hunger Games type of horror game. A game where it's understood you're all trying to survive. A game where the players know their characters are antagonists or temporary allies, but the players aren't. You know, the players understand they're telling the story, but the characters won't necessarily help each other. A game where there is an incentive to kill your opponents.
Mm.
Because like most games, when you
Your
kill,
rival players.
yeah, when you kill an opponent, you degenerate, you lose sanity, you lose
Mm.
clarity, or this and that. But to make this game system have that, when you do that, you get this bonus. So it then becomes a nice mechanism that makes the player feel, I don't want to kill, but I need to or I have to, and
Mm.
it nicely then connects to that horror of that type of a story. So it allows stuff like Saw. It allows stuff like, um, yeah. Aina shares, I love Jurassic Park. Hate the house lizards and geckos. I know, Aina, but the GM will struggle to describe things without getting too close.
Getting too lizard-like.
So yeah,
It's a reptile
It's
thing.
gonna be tricky. It's gonna be super tricky. Um, yeah, but that's I think a horror I would like to end up writing somehow, and that includes characters who are in a no-win situation, but then the players don't see it as a unfun game.
Then I wonder, like to what degree have games like really captured sort of the quote unquote the serial killer experience
Hmm.
mindset.
The closest we know of is Slasher, which
Yeah,
was a World of Darkness, sorry, a Chronicles of Darkness game system.
yeah, but it's not like, but that's like major supernatural
Yeah.
horror. Like that's why I'm just thinking like, and it's sort of like, okay, I guess my best example of this is movies like Copycat,
Hmm.
where there is there is a serial killer. Sure, there's a police presence, but then you also have a non-police and protagonist. In this
Hmm.
case, it was agoraphobic Sigourney Weaver.
Hmm.
Then that experience is very unique. Or
Hmm.
it's like Bone Collector, right?
Hmm.
Then you have like the you have the aiding investigation civilians and aiding
And
and they get pulled into
but I
things.
feel that then feels like such a challenge to write,
Yeah,
because then you now have um you're sort of now writing a system for GMs to use to generate the murder,
yeah, yeah.
and then the clues are there and stuff. But
I don't know. I mean, I
yeah,
feel
yeah, yeah.
like,
But I see it.
but
It's
it's
a
not impossible in the sense
yeah
that because things like Gumshoe, Brindlewood Bay, I mean,
does touch on
the
that.
way they've turned things around in
Mm.
like the clue and discovery, where instead of the players constantly interrogating the GM, is this true or not? Is this true or
Yeah.
not? Because the GM is the arbiter of all facts.
Yes.
Now it's like so many narrative games have players creating their own facts,
Mm-mm.
or creating their interpretation. Then then it kind of works. So that's just my mindset. Like I don't know. I don't have a serious system for it.
No, I like
Hey,
it.
idea.
And
So
yeah, because yeah, Gumshoe and the like did try to sidestep it and say just let them choose and then generate a clue that touches onto it. But then to have a system that does help the GM generate the clues, and then somehow help the players are also helped in considering looking for those.
yeah, and then I don't know. Then you roll for like the serial killer.
Hmm.
Like what will happen next, or what do you discover? Things
But
like
I
that.
guess the challenge there would be how to do a police procedural
Yeah.
without the game feeling like a procedural game.
Or I mean, like, or nobody is in the police. So then it's closer to Brindlewood Bay, but
Hmm.
like, but you're not necessarily skilled. I mean, the police investigation is happening in the background.
Hmm.
You're not really supposed to investigate it, but then somehow you're in the killer's path. I don't know. I'm just like
Mhm, mhm,
something like that, like
mhm.
or it's like shit. What's that? It's like Utopia,
Mm.
right? Because the core, sorry, original Utopia, the original Utopia, where you had a bunch of people who were fans of this comic.
Jessica High.
and and well, not Jessica Hyde. They weren't fans of Jessica Hyde, but they were fans of this comic,
Mhm.
and they were like essentially a group of redditors
Mhm.
who got together to talk about it in person. And then they got swept by the events
Yes.
that they were inadvertently investigating, but they were never members of authority. They did not have specialized
Mhm.
skills. So that kind of a thing. I mean, like Utopia,
Brilliantly written.
as a dystopian science fiction story thing actually had very intense horror elements,
Mhm.
because when you imagine what the characters were going through, it definitely feels like
The
a
challenges they had to deal with,
yeah,
the
it's
realizations
it's
of what
that
was
fish
after
out of
them.
water type
Mhm.
thing. Okay, Ina's like, oh, just realized stream that my love for gaming may supersede my fears. It is true though. I mean, like we discover different aspects of ourselves through gaming.
Mhm.
Although you'll also discover things you weren't comfortable with. Like I don't like discovering I was a robot all this time.
Mhm.
That is like, oh, I didn't realize it would be a traumatic thing. We didn't X card it. I just barreled through.
And we didn't realize
Yeah.
that it would happen in that direction.
Yeah, it just narratively happened. And then it led to the true horror of any RPG, which is playing multiple characters. So as a player, I mean, sure, GMs do it all the time, but as a player, you have certain expectations that I get a break when my turn is over. But then when you're playing multiple characters who split up and decide to visit all the other characters, you now are a GM also because you are in every scene. It keeps happening to me. It keeps happening to me. So yes.
It hasn't in the vampire game.
Wow, that's our example. It didn't happen in the vampire game.
Because I can't be blamed for Pendragon. You walk the Merlin path. You
No,
chose
no. The problem with Pendragon is multi-generational. Our characters are living
That's
literally
true.
outliving the
The
previous
original.
generation. They
But at the same time, you don't want to give them up.
yeah,
You-
they're
you-
just hanging around. So like keep the sheet ready.
Mm-hmm.
So that there is that challenge. I don't know how it's gonna go in our Knights Black Agents game because it's already a world of espionage. Someone is literally impersonating me already. So we'll see how that goes.
But I think the only game that had us intentionally have multiples was Eclipse Face. When you can make copies of yourself.
Or no, or the was this Wield?
Wield.
Wield is tricky because you play a
Generational game as well.
you play a generational but you also play
The wielder.
an artifact of power, but then an artifact needs a wielder.
And you play someone else's
You
wielder.
play someone else's wielder or you're someone
Yeah.
else's artifact. It's a round robin around the table of interconnectedness, and that was another tiring game. Or like our multi-generational adventure aberrant Trinity
Mm.
game, which is like for the most part it seemed okay, like all of our characters are isolated from one another in their different time periods until they weren't. And then I keep encountering myself, okay, and then I never like my other iterations, I just gotta say. So yeah, all right. But what else, final thoughts on horror tabletop RPGs?
I think that's pretty much it. Um, should always be fun for everyone. Should never be unsafe. But at the same time, horror is never not uncomfortable.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
you-
main conceit of the genre.
You will have to um, accept that if you want to play a horror game, there will be certain things that will always be uncomfortable, and you have to be honest whether or not these are things you're willing to have in your game. Um, if you play a vampire game, for example, then there is a certain violation that does happen, whether it's on camera or off.
Mhm.
And if you realize that deep down you don't feel comfortable about, you know, glamorizing or making heroes out of these people who are predatory on other people, then maybe that should not be a game you should play.
Mhm.
Likewise, there are games that are very simulational. Um, there's a game wherein it sort of captures the events of a school shooter.
Ooh, okay.
And those are very, very delicate topics, and if
Mhm.
you find a group that's willing to play it, then more power to you. But make sure that you're always constantly checking in on each other. You can't just rely on he said yes and everything's okay. Sometimes people learn things aren't, going well during the game itself. So
Hmm.
you have to be open to that.
Yeah, and then and just that there are games that explore very difficult, controversial,
Mm.
or complex topics like that. But then there are also an interesting opportunity to examine these
Hmm.
situations from a historical context
Yes.
to 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 maybe kind of drive home a point. Because like Bluebeard's Bride, for example, it has a it has a deep seated message
Hmm.
that it wants players to walk away with, and I respect the
Hmm.
design for it, despite how horrific it can be
Yes.
at times. But the actual message of the game is quite brilliant.
Hmm.
And then, I mean, and not all games are the same. I mean, like some games are just super excited about the genre or about the concept, and then may not necessarily have built enough fences around it
Hmm.
to keep it safe. And
Hmm.
that's why you always do these with a group who agrees to it, a group you trust, and then you try to work together.
Hmm.
And then I guess last thing is like then be prepared if ever to walk away. Like
Yes.
you may hit a roadblock, and then maybe it
Isn't
is too
working.
much,
Mm.
and it's or one actually as long as one player can't take it, then the game may have to end.
Mhm.
As it in its current form, because again everybody needs to
and,
be
and and
enjoying at the
that's the
table.
level of communication that gaming should always have. You have to be communicative to each other on where you are. No one's a mind reader.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how close you are to each other, um, it would be unfair to say the person should have known, um, if you weren't able to also communicate things better.
Yeah.
Because there's always the possibility of them coming from a miscommunication. Maybe they saw you laughing and
Mm-hmm.
thought, okay, it's fine.
But you apparently it was a defensive laugh,
Yeah,
and you were
then
hiding your fear.
and this isn't to say you're alone in having to be it. Everyone has to be communicating. Just because you saw you laughing, that person should have also checked in. Are you sure it's really okay and stuff like that. There should always be that communication. So there, Aina
Ooh.
does share. Always feels safe in tag sessions. Bluebeard
Glad you
made
feel safe.
made her face herself. So grateful for that gift. I still have it. Also agrees Utopia is brilliant. So for the rest of the month, we shall still continue to cover any horror related topics as direct or as um, distant as they may be.
Yeah.
Like our later weeks might be just a vampire movie or something like that. Um, but at the same time, we have tag bites happening on Saturday morning. So for those who are looking for one-shot horror role-playing games, you might want to check that out. For tonight, however, that's our episode, and
Yep.
we're very thankful you joined us. We hope you'll join us again next time.
Was this a suggestion? Oh my god! I realized this was a request, right?
This was partly a request. Um, yeah, I forgot the name. Wait.
Yeah. So I'm also like, oh
But it
no,
was
we
in
gotta
terms
pull
of
it up.
running horror games.
Yeah, yeah. Toby actually gave a talk on this once upon a time, and then I think it's still somewhere on the internet.
Yeah,
But
so this was um, a request on building up dread and desperation in tabletop RPGs
hmm,
by Artsy Barrels.
Artsy Barrels.
So yeah,
Thanks so much. If you have questions or suggestions for future episodes, you too can fill up the form at bit.ly Baduy Pride
mm,
Ideas and let us know. And because it's horror month, then try to give us some horror related stuff, and we'd be so happy to explore it because I love horror. Okay, so no, I don't, but I enjoy exploring it with you. All right, then you can follow us on Twitter, Altobi No Shade, RG Sunico.
you could also check out our blog, baduypray.com, for all the previous episodes and stuff about us.
Feel free to continue the conversation in the comments below. Let us know what
Ah,
are
Tom, I'm
your
sorry.
favorite, tabletop horror RPG systems or even stories, characters, or
Mhm.
experiences. I mean, like the real best thing about a tabletop RPG is talking about it after.
Mm.
And be sure to subscribe for notifications, whether on Facebook or YouTube, so you don't miss our next live stream. Once again, I'm Rocky.
And I'm Toby.
And
And
this
this
is
is
Baduy
Baduy
Pride.
Pride.
Good night, everyone.